Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of HCTalk. As always, I'm your host, Lance Gormley, and our guest on the program today is a Harvey County resident, Danny Bergman, who is the Professor of Science and Education Chair at Wichita State University. He also is the author of Teaching is for Superheroes. How are you doing today, Mr. Professor Bergman?
Doing well.
I got to call you. I got to give you that. I'm not, until you tell me call you Danny, and then I'm just going to be like, yeah, Professor Bergman. Okay, whatever you say. Professor Dan, I don't know.
Danny's fine. Yeah.
Is that what you tell your students too?
I usually say answer to whatever. Just call me as long as it's appropriate.
Professor D, Professor B, right? Whatever, right? Yeah. And Bergman, that's easy to pronounce name, right? Yeah. For the most part. So yeah, they do that. But okay, so in full disclosure, Professor Bergman and I attend the same church. Probably not as often as I should in person, but online. But you are an avid goer, right? I see you there with your family all the time. And when it came up that I found out you were an author of a book that really helped impact educators' lives in a way that gives them the best foot forward and a perspective that will help them understand teaching from a different perspective and a different level, I thought, man, that's interesting. And I want to have you out here on the program and hear your story and hear, you're from Wichita State. I'm Wichita State guy. So we're hitting it on all levels. We go to the same church. We're both Harvey County. We're both Wichita guys, So I definitely just am very thankful that you're here on the program today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So what I always start this program is we try to get a brief bio of who you are, where you hail from, maybe where you went to high school, what activities you like, where did you go to college, just basically a brief rundown of how you found yourself here today. So have at it.
Sure. Well, I probably should apologize for those viewing that this is not my normal professor garb, but it's summer, so not summer vacation, but summer break. So, but I'm wearing my Superman t-shirt in honor of the new movie coming out. But I guess everybody has an origin story, to use a superhero term. And so, I was born and raised in Nebraska, O'Neill, the Irish capital of Nebraska, although I'm not Irish. We had a big parade every St. Patrick's Day and got our feet green because we marched on the painted shamrock in the middle of town. But so I was involved in music a lot. I don't play sports. I enjoy sports, but I'm not that coordinated. So I did a lot of music, drama, and then at the time I thought I'll go when I was kind of a given. Of course, you're going to go to college. My parents both did. They're actually both first generation college students. They didn't use that term back then, but that's what they were. And so I followed my brother and sister. Both went to Wayne State College. I went there for 1 year and liked it a lot, but I decided, wasn't quite sure what my major was going to be. I thought I liked teaching. I liked music, so maybe I'd be a music teacher. That's what my brother was doing. He's actually one of the band directors here in Newton High School. And so I really enjoyed it, did well in my classes, but I thought if I'm going to teach, I think I liked science as well. That was I had a teacher who was a real big impact on me in high school. And so I thought if I'm going to go in science, I could go to a bigger university and do more research opportunities. So I looked at going to University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It probably didn't hurt that they had just won their national championship one of those years. It was back in the 90s.
Right.
And so I thought I can go there. I'll join the marching band, and I tried out and I made it. And I actually did get some research opportunities. I worked at the observatory with a telescope and there's a street just across the street from the stadium. But did my undergraduate there and taught for 5 years in Aurora, Nebraska, which is a small town, about 4,000, 5,000 people, just straight north of here, about 6 hours. And really enjoyed that too. And at the time, I wasn't married at the time, so I thought I'll just keep on taking graduate classes. They always say, as a teacher, take graduate classes, work up on the pay scale, and you'll learn more. We always advocate for lifelong learning, so I should be learning myself. And I think it also helps to just remember what it's like to be a student when you're sitting in those classes. Or, of course, at that time, my first graduate class I took was this new thing called an online class. And so it was through online and submitted work. And so I took night classes, weekend classes, satellite classes with the big TV screen with a group of people, all kinds of things. And worked on my first master's that way, just in curriculum and instruction, just in teaching. While I was teaching, I guess I should say what I was teaching chemistry and physics primarily as a high school teacher. And while I taught, I also helped out with some drama and some musicals. We did Hello, Dolly. That was a big production that we did. Lost my voice twice, 2 years in a row, trying to teach all day and then go and direct plays in the theater in the evenings. But But while I was finishing my first master's, my former professor at Nebraska, that's where I did my master's as well, he had said, "You ever thought about doing a PhD?" And at the time, I was just trying to get my graduate degree done and get all the paperwork. And I hadn't thought about it, but kind of stuck with me, and I kind of molded around in my mind as I was still teaching. This is about my third or fourth year teaching. Still single, so I thought, well, just keep on taking graduate classes. So I took another master's program. This is more of one of those cohorts that you kind of do kind of lockstep with a group of people. This was through Nebraska Kearney. Most of the classes were online, some distance, and it was more of an administration program, so how to be a principal. I've never used it. I never used it formally, I guess. There's things I've learned from it, of course. But so I worked on that graduate program as well. And then after my fifth year at Aurora, I thought, well, if I do a PhD, actually it was about my fourth year, I asked my former professor, what would you recommend? He said, well, I wouldn't recommend going back to Nebraska because I kind of taught you all I know, and it's good to diversify. So I asked him, where would you recommend in the Midwest? Because all my family was pretty much in the Midwest at that time in Nebraska. And so he had said, well, he recommended a couple of places, and one of them was Iowa State. So I actually had my former pastor had moved to Ames, where Iowa State is, and was preaching there. And I thought, well, there's a connection there. And he was actually, my best friend was his son. And so got connected there and went to Ames and loved it, and loved the town, loved the university. The big thing I learned was it was very hard to quit teaching, or leave my teaching profession, I should say, because I really enjoyed Aurora. If you would have asked me, what are you going to be doing in 30 years? I probably would have thought I might be teaching here for the rest of my life. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was a small town, had a good, kind of small town community feel. But I thought, well, I'm still not married, still got time. If I'm going to do, more coursework, more graduate programs, the time involved, I thought I might as well do it now. So I moved to Ames and did that for 3 years. And I think I learned a lot of what I thought I was supposed to know as an undergraduate and as a teacher. I thought I knew what I was doing as a teacher. We kind of do that whole first year teaching is the hardest, and you have to get through the first couple of years and all that. And I never doubted, hey, I like this. It's tough, but you get better at it, just like with anything. But then when I went back to graduate school for my doctorate, my PhD program, I realized, there's a lot I don't know about teaching. And so it was a lot of relearning and rethinking about what you're doing as a teacher. So after I finished that program, though, Wichita State had an opening, and I've been here ever since. So I'll be starting my 19th year this fall at Wichita State. So not as exciting as coming from an exploding planet or having any trauma like that, but that's kind of my academic life story, I guess.
Very cool, very cool. So okay, when once you completed your PhD, you mentioned the transition of teaching from getting your bachelor's and then going and obviously becoming a teacher. Then from there, just the mindset and perspective of you could do that the rest of your life. Then that turned into more education, which then turned into a PhD. What was the why behind that?
Well, we like to use the phrase teaching or learning should be a lifelong endeavor, lifelong learners. And I went even back to job interviews or scholarship, applications. Why do you want to teach? Like, well, I love learning. I like to share that joy with others, which I honestly mean. And I think there's all kinds of ways of learning. You don't have to do it formally, or sometimes it gets kind of expensive financially. And that's also something that having the support of my family and having the circumstances I was in, thinking like, I'm single, don't have a family to take care of. I could afford to make those transitions or make the moves. Just that, I always felt like there's always something more. Even I remember conversations with my professors and other teachers. I remember sitting at one of my graduation ceremonies. I think it was from my master's. And I remember watching some of the doctorate candidates come up and get their degrees and their hoods or whatever they get. And I remember thinking, I don't feel finished yet. I don't feel like I've done everything I can do. And so, and again, it's just one way to learn, one way to grow and to get credentials. There's all kinds of programs out there, but for me, it was, my business is education, so it was a lot of that as well, for good or for bad, the formal nature of it. But just that there's always more to learn.
Yeah. Did you? So a lot of times, and I say a lot of times, and I might be mistaken on this, but I'll just use the word oftentimes, when you are pursuing a PhD or even sometimes a master's degree, there's some graduate teaching assistant positions, or you might have some in the classroom teaching college classes before you are awarded your PhD. Did you go through anything like that?
Yeah. So for my my master's degrees, for education at least and teaching, they were all while I was teaching full time, so I could take what I was learning and apply it. There's actually research that shows teachers typically feel like they learn better from their graduate programs than their undergraduate, because they actually learn and they can apply it, that day or that moment. For my PhD program, that was part of the package, so to speak, was having a teaching assistant, and a research assistantship, so I could help with some grant projects, or whether it's anything from typing out transcripts or recording data, some of the mind-numbing things that I think artificial intelligence can do now. I'm not sure, but and then I also probably the best experience, or one of the better experiences, was teaching college. I remember my first day teaching college. I taught elementary science methods because they always have a lot of elementary teacher candidates or students in that program, so they need elementary science. Science is not the most favorite topic for most elementary teachers, so it's sometimes the more challenging one. So I went in and taught elementary majors, a class of 25, 30. Some semesters I would teach two sections of it. And then I'd actually go out and see them in their schools for part of the semester as well. So they weren't student teaching, they weren't doing the full-time instruction, but they were out in schools for part of the semester. The biggest thing I learned was they're just like my high schoolers, and sometimes even more challenging when it comes to management. You think, oh, it's college, they're going to be well-behaved, they're going to be motivated to be there, but no, it's maybe even there's less of a threat of going to the principal's office or something. Yes. So it's more, we need to be engaged, I need to be real with them. You can't be the authoritarian. You're not expecting that in college, but just to learn along with them, but also have humility that you don't always know all the answers, and let's learn together. But my first day, I wore a pair of jeans thinking, I'm teaching college, I can wear jeans. And I know a lot of teachers do that now, but this is 20 years ago. Yeah. I never wore jeans after that day. I thought, this is just too casual something. I need to go back and wear my my khakis or my button shirt or whatever. So.
Yeah. It's interesting. You hit on something that I returned to school as an adult, right? Mm-hmm. So where we think, mentioning high school, generally speaking, are at their home with their parents, there's boundaries, there's things they have, they're in the nest. Then when they go to college, oftentimes that's away from the nest. And so then that's the first opportunity that they have to hone those skills in a transitional and pivotal time of their life when they're being pulled in all directions. And so there is kind of a learning curve at times when it comes to like you said, they're a lot like my high school kids, but you can't be one way with them. I mean, because they are now adults and responsible for things, but there's still a nurturing that needs to take place with those students as a professor to ensure that they're learning basic life skills on their own.
Yeah. The biggest thing I missed from teaching day-to-day high school was those relationships building up with your kids and their families too, seeing their parents and events and things like that, extracurriculars. So seeing my students maybe sometimes once a week, and maybe for just 1 hour or 2 hours, and then they're growing up. They're leaving the nest. I think more than the classes, more than the content. College or that post high school experience is just learning how to grow up and be responsible, and there's different people can handle it in different ways. I was surprised. I thought I'm a very studious person, I like school, but it was going from being a passive student, just tell me what to learn, in high school I'll do it, turn it back in college. It was some of the professors, hey, if you come to class, great, if you don't, so it's on you. And so I need to take the initiative more, and I would hope our high school and even younger students, we have that more active, assertive, role in education where it's not just do whatever the teacher says. I mean, that's part of it, but also you have to make decisions and you have a safe area where you can do that and have the consequences and, have more of a proactive part of it too.
Do you think education's changed in that way at like the K through 12? I mean, obviously not K through 12, but when you're talking about high school and even middle school, you said a phrase which is just tell me what to do. The teacher tells me what to do. I do the assignment and I move on. Do you feel that education has changed in a way? Because I can remember my son just graduated high school, and I can remember just telling him repeatedly through the 4 years of high school, just do what the teacher says, because that's the education I was raised with, right? And then it's like, well, it's not that simple. There's more choices here. There's more classes that I can take, and not all teachers are the same. And I realized that now, I mean, at least at Newton High School, and I'm assuming is similar to other educational platforms in different districts and everything, that it really is a lot like my experience in college, which is you got these classes, here's your curriculum, here's how you do it, and then the rest is on you.
Yeah, I think ideally we're looking at that we're promoting more of a mature, proactive stance from students. Even in college, unfortunately, I think it's human nature. I like, just tell me what to do. I remember having that feeling, or maybe even saying it, or maybe not to a professor or my teacher to his face, but thinking that to their face. But it's just human nature. I think, like, it's just easier. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Maybe it's some personalities. I think there are other people, ones that think outside the box. Sometimes the ones that struggle in school because they don't want to follow the rules all the time. And some days they have more struggles, but sometimes they're the ones that, we celebrate some of those people too and the successes they've had. Although we often don't see, well, if there's a positive of learning how to play along, do the system. I even say that with my future teachers I work with, that sometimes there are hoops we have to jump through, whether we agree with everything or not. Just we have to do it. There's just you have to do it to play along sometimes, and knowing when to, go against the grain, or when to speak up, or when just to go along. I think there's having that wisdom and of when that. So I think with education, I think we've tried that more, definitely with the pandemic and the upheaval of schooling. It was more, okay, do it at home, and then, well, we're just trying to stay alive right now, stay safe. So just if you don't do it, well, we're still going to pass you and move on. I think we've kind of gone through that hump, and I think we're still kind of seeing the ripple effect of that no, now we're back to, yes, you do need to do this work or whatever. So
especially now, because the kids that were getting ready to go into their freshman year of high school, eighth grade and into their freshman year, are now graduating and going into college.
Yes.
Right. So that's like you said, that ripple. We're seeing that then move on, which of course the younger kids, but even then, I mean, it's going to be 12 or 13 years before we see the last of those kids that might have even been in kindergarten and first, second, third grade. I don't even know how. God bless parents' heart here. I had kids that were in that mid range, right? So we're talking middle school, and then both of them in the middle school years. 4th to 8th grade, and I don't know how a parent would even manage that time with for first through fourth.
Oh yeah.
How do you teach that?
And
I'm not a teacher. That's like, what am I supposed to do?
I think it did give everybody an appreciation for what teachers do, and not just the know the content, know how to do long division or something, but it's like, okay, the day to day, the hour to hour, moment by moment, monitoring and instruction and transitions and. And of course, we were living with, well, what's necessary, what's not, and full disclosure, my family now, we have kids who are in public school right now. We've had kids in homeschool. We have some private school situations, which is neat. I think about Harvey County is we've been kind of connected with all kinds of schooling situations, and I think everybody has to find their fit, and there's maybe not a perfect fit for each person. I think it's just there's pros and cons for each kind, and so we kind of learned that ourselves. But, so our kids at the time were being mostly homeschooled, and so it really didn't change us. I think our kids kind of felt like, well, we're missing out on some of the whatever. But
I still got to do school.
It's like didn't change us. We're still at home, but I think learning. How to manage your time and all that. And I think we're still seeing, maybe it'll be decades that we'll come back and say, whoa, what we did here, or the impacts of this, or now we kind of see. And so it'll be interesting to see in the next few years what research has found, or pros and cons or ups and downs of that too.
And that's your research mind. I can see that ticking right now. I think that's interesting because you're already plotting charts, aren't you? I love it. Okay. So you had mentioned something, and I'll just throw this out there too. To combine two things together that I hear you saying. One is that talking about the pandemic, not so much, but this idea that when you instruct your teachers, that there are times in which you have to play within the system. And I don't know if play within the system is the correct term, but I think people understand that. And then your life experience where, your children learn best in different environments. But when you get into the public education, not saying anything negative, you are trying to design some kind of a curriculum or standard for the masses, right? And it is not designed to be individualistic. You try, but that's not really how that's geared, is it?
Yeah, it's historically that factory method of let's just throw them all at the same time, and for right or wrong, I mean, there's efficiency there. I think that's I think sometimes it is for wrong for those who are maybe not at the right pace, and I work with teachers who most of us. I tell them we're the weird ones. We like school. We like to learn. Oh, give me a worksheet. I'll fill it out. Or give me this, web quest.
Sense of accomplishment.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, and I've run into some who, I didn't like school, or that I struggled, or I came from this different background. And I think sometimes they have an advantage that those of us who are goody two shoes, they can see, that's not going to fly. Or you know what, maybe the high achievers they're going to do fine whether you're there or not. Yeah. It's those that, how can I help connect it with them? How can I, make it real and find a way for them to thrive, which may not be getting an A. Of course, now as a parent, I see that too, that, you would think, oh, I want all my kids to be straight A students. Well, you know what? Every kid can succeed in different ways. And just because you have a certain GPA, that doesn't always necessarily mean you've learned more or that you are accomplishing more. I think finding that way to connect, because we do live in a system where it's, kind of, we have to move them through the grade. And I know even the legislature in Kansas has talked about, the topic has come up of like, well, what about the policies on holding people back? And of course, there's personal and social ramifications of that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's complicated. People learning is complicated.
Well, and it's a system, and it's got its strengths and its weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a parent who sits back and says, "I want a straight C student," right? Everybody wants their children to be successful. There's a lot of pressure there, right? And as you mentioned, there's all kinds of other issues with if a child is having a difficult time learning, because I'm a firm believer, and I attest to the fact that much of education, especially now, is teaching you how to learn. If you can learn how to learn, then ultimately you can learn anything, right? The process is generally speaking the same. And also, it's kind of funny that you talked about just teachers and trying to help with the individuals and bring it to life for them. Those are the teachers that are the most impactful, that make that connection. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Since I work primarily with science teachers, I have some that, it's always fun it's easy to have those like, wow, I'd love to be a student in your class. Let me just sit and learn. Of course, I always feel like I always have something I can have to help them learn about how to be a better teacher. But there are some, I think, every year that come in thinking, I'm just going to wow my students with all the knowledge I have, or all the cool, podcasts I've listened to, or video clips, or this interesting information. I think, well, yeah, that might be impressive for some kids, but how do you really make that real and connect to the other kids? And of course, it's learning about those kids. Of course, every year I have taught, it's more about learning about the kids and less about helping them learn the content. It's like, let me help them learn. Our teachers even tell us, our schools tell us that there's a certain proficiencies they need to perform, but we'll teach them the type of lesson planning we want. We'll teach them how to grade, the grading system we want. We'll teach them about the management system we want. So we have some basics we try to teach them, and going back to the research and the history, but also just like corporations will say that too, like, well, get them through to this degree, and then we'll teach them what we really want them to do. And so it's that challenge of efficiency, but also give them a bigger picture of why are we doing what we're doing? Why do you want to be a teacher? What are the bigger ramifications, the impact on kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you're a professor at Wichita State University, been there 19 years. What to you over the 19 years has been something that you found to be the most challenging about being a professor?
In teaching education, I'll just say we always need more teachers. So that's always the challenge of, as a professor in my position, of course, as a teacher, I was a teacher. I taught, planned lessons, did activities, followed up with kids, their families. As a professor, and sometimes I have to tell this to my students, teaching is just one part of my job. It's like maybe 40%. I mean, I think technically sometimes they talk the 40-40-20 rules. 40% teaching, 40% research or scholarship, and 20% service, which that's just kind of out there. But so it's a blend of things. So balancing, there's always more you can do. I could always plan a better lesson, or I could find another video clip to show my kids, or send one more email out to my kids, or follow up with another student. I call them kids, but they're 20, 30 years old sometimes. There's always one more article I could write. There's always one more presentation I could submit. There's always one more committee I could serve on. So I think having that balance of saying, okay, not right now, or I'll do this instead, or I'll do this. I'll tell you the biggest help has been the year I started at Wichita State was the same year I got married. So having a wife saying, where are you going to be? When are you going to be home?
Yeah. Work-life balance.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Right, if I were still single, I probably would have a lot more publications, more whatever. But I'm happy with having that balance. And my wife is very good at keeping me accountable. Like, okay, let's, or even kind of being grounded, like keeping a reality check. Like, there's always more you can do. But let's, and of course, now having kids, let's go to the baseball game. Let's go to the track meet. Let's go to the concert. Let's just go to VBS or whatever. Let's do all these things and make sure we have time where, there's always more you can do. But
well, and you're limited in time. I mean, there's only, so many hours in the day.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I'm going to say I'm like this, like you in this way is it's very easy for me to, like when I was going to school to get my MPA, I mean, I would spend endless amounts of hours, probably way more than I ever needed to, because it interested me and I loved to learn and I wanted to know more. And so, where maybe somebody skims over some book or something, I'm sitting there, delving into it, similar to what you're saying. But speaking of books, being professor and all of this and coming to, what I mentioned at the beginning of the program, you're an author. What possessed you to endeavor to write a book? Were you just sitting there thinking about the topical, stuff and going, somebody should write a book about that, and then that somebody's going to be me?
Oh yeah. So as a professor, I do a lot of writing, just articles and essays and research briefs and things like that. A lot of what I do, since I'm a professor of education, I get to write for teachers a lot of times. I do some of the research on what are effective ways of teaching science, or right now I just had an article I'm working on that's about online versus face-to-face and what are the differences. But I also get to write for teachers. And so I'm also, I like teaching. I like science. My personal background is I like superheroes. I was a comic book fan when I was younger, still am, but so I'm kind of a super nerd and all those combinations. So I saw, there's a lot of common ground with teaching. I noticed just, teaching, we have origin stories, some good, some bad. We have costumes we have to put on our teaching outfit. Like I'm not wearing my, my back to school outfit yet, but we have, even our names. Are you Mr. Bergman? Are you Dr. Bergman? Are you Danny? I tell my students, I'll answer to whatever as long as it's not a curse word. But and we have powers, and so I saw those connections. We have teammates. We've got arch enemies. Even we have sidekicks, and so I saw it's kind of some connections there. I do still teach a class. It's actually for first year students or freshmen at Wichita State. We have a FYS first year seminar program, and basically as professors can pick. We have certain, back to or how to college, so to speak, or how to succeed in college, time management, resources and getting, welcome to WSU. But basically, we can pick whatever topic we want. And so I thought, I could talk about, superheroes going to school. And so I know there's the X-Men, of course. That was one of my favorites growing up and still is, where they were a school for superheroes, but also looking at other movies and cartoons and things like that. So I use that as a framework. And then as we talk about superpowers, we say, well, what are your powers? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And a lot of times it's procrastination is our number one weakness for our students. Yes, our kryptonite. Yeah. And so from there, I thought, I could work on it. I could maybe write. I think I wrote a few essays on this, but I thought I actually have a blog where whatever's coming up, there's a new movie or a new comic book series or something comes up in the news and education. Sometimes I'll go from the education part and say, oh, here's something that came up in education, whether it's, news or research, and say, well, how does that connect to, Batman and choosing his sidekicks and things like that. So I had a blog that I still update, once a month or so. And from there, I just thought I could probably put a book together on this too. Kind of outlined it and submitted. I did submit a sabbatical research, what do they call it, application for sabbatical. At Wichita State, you can get a 1 semester off where basically you have to say, it's not a semester off, you're a semester doing something, whether you're doing research or writing or teaching. And so I submitted for that because I thought I'd kind of need just a jump start outside of my regular schedule. I love to teach. I love, my colleagues, but just to kind of sit down and hunker down and do it day by day rather than just, whenever I have time. But so I had a sabbatical right around during the pandemic time is when all this started churning. So, so I worked on that, kind of dove in and submitted an application or a packet, I guess, for a publisher. And actually, surprisingly, the first publisher I submitted to was my number one choice. They accepted it, and I'm like, wow, well, that was easy. So, so then I had to write it. Then I had to actually finish it. But actually, that was part of the joy too, is to write it. So just kind of seeing those connections, and now going out. I just was presenting last week at a conference it's called Educators Rising, but it's Future Educators of America. Is a national conference that I was presenting at, and got to see a bunch of high school students that want to be teachers and I was talking about origin stories and how we all have, different strengths, different passions, different, pitfalls that we go into in our origins, and how does that help us become better teachers, and how does it connect with our kids? So, that's been exciting.
Very cool. So for somebody that hasn't read the book or might not know what the main meat of the story is, what does this book hope to educate people about?
Well, it does nerd out, so about superheroes and about education, but it's for... I've had people ask me, "Oh, is this for kids?" Like, "Oh, no," because comic books, of course, aren't for kids anymore. But also, because a nice, gimmicky cover. It's a beautiful cover, but and I actually have some artwork in it that a friend of mine that actually did some original artwork. I said, "Can you draw some superheroes doing teacher things?" And he said, "Sure, I can try that." So I have some comic book kind of style font and things, some word balloons. But it's actually for new teachers that might be thinking about teaching. Or it's also for veteran teachers that just need to kind of like remind themselves, like, oh yeah, why do I want to be a teacher? Or what are my strengths as a teacher? What do I want my legacy to be like? And so it's kind of taken each chapter is kind of like a superhero topic, like origin stories, secret hideouts, teammates, gadgets and gizmos. We all have a utility belt like Batman, but we probably don't have gas bombs in it. We have chalk, or we've got an iPad or something. And so learning about just different, using that as kind of a springboard to go into other teaching topics. So I do try to look at the research on I think teaching is sometimes susceptible to, well, that's just your style. You're that kind of a teacher. Like, well, there is definitely some style and personality to teaching, which is one thing that makes it great. We can bring our personalities into it. But there is research that shows, well, what is the best way to help people learn or make connections, or what is effective practice or best practice, we call it. So I could take some of those aspects and connect them to superhero themes, but then also go into, well, so what's the application in our classroom? So it's kind of a neat, and plus I got to nerd out and read a lot of comic books and do some research on now, where was the first appearance of kryptonite and things like that, which, fun fact, it wasn't in the comic books. So just looking at different superhero themes and history, and gave me an appreciation, even like looking at when teachers think about what they wear as a teacher, professional dress. I talk about my first year or my first day as a teacher, I usually wear like dark black or blue, not because I'm like Batman, but just because that's kind of a nice calming professional appearance. I'll save my bright reds and bright yellow shirts for later. But even in superhero history, they used blues and reds and yellows primary colors, for one, because the ink on the comic book page showed up better. And, in Americana, red, white, and blue. And then, so because of that, well, then the villains have to be green and purple and orange. And so I kind of go into some of the history. There's some really neat resources on that. But then having teachers think about, what do you wear as a teacher? And does it matter? Because sometimes people say, well, it doesn't really matter. But, just thinking all those little things that you can kind of unpack. So again, for a new teacher, for a veteran teacher, it's just kind of a neat way to celebrate teaching and rethink what we're doing.
Very cool. Okay, so what was the most challenging thing? This is your first book about writing and then being published.
Oh, let's see. Well, writing is kind of a long process. It's always that first draft outline. I kind of had a rough outline for each chapter, and I did have the luxury of having that sabbatical, a semester where I could really hammer home and sit down and work on it for a couple months. Down in my basement, in my nerd cave, I have comic books and inspirational statues and action figures kind of out there to inspire me. But probably the most challenging, the revision process, when I've written it once, you think, oh, it's great, but like, okay, now let's go back and tweak this, whether it's add more information or clarify or take out excessive words, because I'm wordy as a professor, I like to talk, and going through the edits and the fine tooth, bless those who are the editors, because, do you need a period there or a semicolon, that kind of thing? And I think, wow, I appreciate them looking at that and helping me unpack that. But so I'd say the biggest challenge is kind of the ongoing, just getting the word out. Nowadays in publishing, it's it's, what's your social media impact, or what's your networking? And so I've got connections. I present, I share, and so every year I go out to conferences and I do workshops at schools, and so different ways, just getting the word out, because there is no, at least in academic publishing, that's what this is. There's no like marketing team like you're going to have for a Harry Potter book, or the latest James Patterson book or something like that. There's not a marketing team or anything like that. So it's kind of up to you to kind of get the word out and to celebrate. And so I didn't think about this as I was writing. I just thought, I like to, let's explore superheroes and teaching. Of course, superheroes have been popular for the last 20, 25 years, kind of with all the movies and things. But I didn't think about it at the time, but after I'd written it and was starting to get ready for the publishing of it, it was, let's just celebrate teaching. Let's just, be a cheerleader. I don't think of myself as a rah-rah cheerleader type person, but we can celebrate teachers. Again, whatever you teach, public school, private school, homeschool, high school, middle school, elementary, all kinds of levels. Let's just review and reflect on what makes good teaching and celebrate what those are.
Yeah, it is the truth. As a teacher, we say teachers are heroes, right? And I view that when I hear that definition, that although I didn't really relate to all of my teachers, I had some really what I would look at as good teachers that were relatable, and that might just have personality complements versus personality conflicts, right? But for somebody to take their life's work and that be to invest in educating someone else, primarily even youth at the pre-K level to the grade, middle, and then high school, and then even into college, that deserves some recognition.
Yeah,
because you're not making the big bucks, investing in children's lives through education.
Yeah. The whole, like, people even say, "Oh, you're such a hero," or "You're a superhero," and you'll see, people on Facebook, whatever, will say that on social media. And there's actually been a little bit of a backlash too, of like, don't call us superheroes because we're not. Don't make it like a pandering thing or whatever we're talking. And so I've tried to make that clear when I wrote the book too. I'm not trying to say, "Oh, you're a superhero," God bless you, but like, oh, let's look at these, strengths and weaknesses and everything like that. But again, to celebrate and like you said, I tell my teachers that I work with, we're, as try as we might, we're not always going to be everybody's favorite teacher. Yeah. That we just, personalities, you might connect, or your culture, your whatever connections, just sometimes we just don't connect. And then the neat thing is sometimes we do in different ways. I kind of like to use a superhero analogy. There's all kinds of Batman stories out there. Some are really campy, like the '60s Adam West, Bam, Piff, Biff Powell, that, holy mackerel and all that. But there's also really dark, the movies, some of them are really dark and broody,
very
and
disturbing, some of them.
Yeah. And we all have our favorite. And I think sometimes that's the way with teaching. Like, you have teachers who are very, charismatic and outgoing, and they're very showy and, standing on tables and things like that. Sometimes they connect with kids, and and sometimes it's more than just entertaining, but you might engage them. But I've also had teachers that are very soft-spoken, quiet, very calm, and they're very impactful in a different way. And sometimes you might connect more with one than the other. That's also, I think, the benefit of getting involved in extracurricular activities, whether it's clubs or sports or music or fine arts. As a student, I enjoyed those things, the ups and downs, but also as a teacher, I had a chance to do some of those things. And you get to see kids in a different light, and maybe, well, this is, they might be okay. They may not even be in my chemistry class. They might do okay. They're not like the straight A student, but boy, they really shine when they get on stage. And it's like, wow, it's so neat, because we all have different passions and different strengths and weaknesses, but to have that connection in different ways.
Yeah. Okay, so I asked you the challenges. So obviously you didn't get into the book and were like, man, I just don't want to do this anymore. So there's got to be something enjoyable about it. So my next question is what did you find is the most enjoyable thing about, and granted, once again, first book. So there's a lot that happens with that. You got challenges, but what's the enjoyable? What was the most enjoyable thing about it?
Probably just this probably sounds cheesy, but just the process of like, wow, this is kind of neat. Like, let's day at a time. And sometimes it was, sometimes you'd write one page at a time. Sometimes it'd be 5 pages at a time or something. But just kind of that, and making those connections, like, oh, wow, this is neat. And learning things myself, whether it's, let me go into the research. What is the research on effective classroom setup? I mean, I talk about that with, like, how would you arrange your classroom? And so there's different research on that and looking at different things. And at the same time, how did, Batman first get his sidekick and things like that? And I, oh yeah, it was okay. So it was, Batman was actually a solo hero for about the first 11 months. And then after that, they said, we need somebody for him to talk to. And so let's add Robin. And then, of course, the research I found, the history that said like the first issue with Robin like doubled in sales because, wow, you have a sidekick now that makes it interesting for the kids to read. And so I connect that to teaching, like, oh, so let's connect with whether it's a student as your, quote, sidekick, or a student teacher you're working with, or a college student, or a paraeducator, all those things, ways to connect and things like that.
Yeah, and then that goes back to like even dynamics of if you have one personality, people can connect with that personality. But if you introduce another personality where, you would think that everybody loves Batman. Obviously, more people love Batman than love Robin, because you wouldn't have Robin if you didn't have Batman. So they're kind of a two to tango. But there are plenty of people whose favorite character is Robin.
Yeah. And teaching, it's like, you might think, boy, that boy really drives me nuts. Or that teacher, boy, they just annoy me. But you know what? I probably annoy somebody too. Or I probably annoy many people, whether it's my, whatever I do or however I speak. But yeah, just knowing that different people connect in different ways, and finding that it used to bother me as a teacher, as a young teacher, when I would try to explain some chemistry concept or steps. A lot of times there's the calculations like stoichiometry and limiting reactants and how many reactants do you need for this product and mole ratio. My kids, a lot of times they come after class and want some help. And I'd try to explain it again. As a young teacher, I really didn't have that many tools at the time. I was still trying to learn. And he said, I just don't get it. But a friend of theirs would be standing right next to him and say, well, no, it's like this. And they'd explain it a different way. And he said, oh, now I get it. And as a new teacher, it used to bother me. I thought, well, I'm the teacher, I should know how to. But then now I'm like, no, it's great. They're getting a different way to look at it. And plus it helps the person teaching. There's that protege effect of you learn by teaching somebody else the same thing, or teaching others. And so just having that humility of, the way I do it is one way. I try to do the best way I can. And again, when I teach, not just I do more than one way. Like, let's do this example. Let's do this hands-on activity. Let's do a group talk. Let's do a video. There's multiple ways. You can't do that all the time. Sometimes you have to find the best way to communicate or to investigate that information. But then also having that time for others to say, oh, well, here's a different way to look at it. Like, oh, okay, yeah, make that connection again. Because again, I might like Robin. Somebody else might like Batman. And sometimes there's like you said, there's, maybe a majority have this preference, but there's always something that might connect better with a different way or a different individual. And so allowing that opportunity to open the conversation and learn from each other.
Well, what I like you're doing with this book, and I'm sure that there's a science behind it, right? No pun intended. When I was growing up, science did not interest me at all, and nothing against the teachers or anything like that. But a lot of the way that I looked at the information that I was consuming when I was going through the middle school and high school years it was a very quick, how does this apply to me? Okay, so application, or putting things in a context in which is relative or interesting, like let's say, when am I going to use geometry and math? Well, you're actually going to use a lot of that in your life that you don't think you are now, because you're not adulting, as we'd call it, right? Compared to, I don't see how this is applicable. But what you're doing with this book and what your style and teaching method is trying to bring out is that you can take and you can, when you're talking about the periodic table and somebody's looking at it going, oh my God, I've got to memorize this, I don't understand. If you are able to frame it in a different way, right, where you attach something like superheroes, or you attach some context, maybe it's music or whatever the case may be, then that opens up the mind of the person to view it in a different context. So they're not just, here, memorize this periodic table, and I'm just sitting here staring at a periodic table all day long, and just it's not jiving, versus here, look at this in a different way. Is that kind of what you're trying to do? Yeah,
I think each of us have different life experiences, different passions, different hobbies, interests. And again, for me, I like superheroes. I like teaching. I do science. I actually do a lot of science, teaching science with superheroes, like with looking at the latest movie and, was that accurate science, or is that a safe practice of, what would happen if you got bit by a radioactive spider? What should you do? I love it. That's my thing. I remember I heard an interview with Bruce Springsteen, which I'm not a big fan of. I know some of his stuff, but I remember him saying in that interview, he said, I know there's better guitar players than I am. There's better singers than I am, but nobody can write the songs that I do. And I thought that's a good point. Like everybody has their own life experiences, those, kind of like a Venn diagram, all those overlapping things where for some people it might be sports and they also like music and how you can connect those things, or you might, are amazing with technology but you also like art and how can you make those connections. I think everybody can find those, and there's most of us have multiple aspects of our lives and our interests. And so some of it may be a future career. Some of it may just be a hobby or something you just do on the weekends to check out or have fun with your family or friends. And so as a teacher, trying to help make those connections to their lives, knowing that you have diverse kids that come from different backgrounds and different experiences. And there's always that challenge of, but then how can I then take them to that next level? Like, okay, so this connects to this. Sometimes it is not always the most exciting thing, but wow, isn't this neat? Like, isn't this a neat connection to this? And then therefore we maybe appreciate it more than just one more thing to learn, because that is part of life. Sometimes you just have to go through the motions, but let's try to see an appreciation or a connection to it.
Yeah, I had a friend growing up who just really struggled with numbers, didn't really like math, loved sports. And I can remember specifically the teacher going to him and saying, what's your favorite sport? And he says, I'm a baseball. I like baseball. It's my favorite sport. So he says, well, why don't you practice these exercises to tell me how many more home runs this person did over this person, and then take the stats and write out the stats and just tell me who's better in what stat. Just write out. Well, you're getting them to do math with something that's interesting with them. But okay, so surely in your days, somebody has brought up the fact that science is a very matter of fact, right? It's very grounded. It's very, I just call it, it's not all relative, right? It's literally, this is how these principles, right? But then you take like the superhero aspect of it, and I'm not sure anything could be more far from science, right? Am I getting something wrong here?
Yeah.
Is it the dichotomy between the two that is really how it's so interesting, and you can use it as a tool? Like let's talk about Wolverine, like you would be easier, I guess, in my opinion, if you were trying to teach science with Star Trek versus if you were teaching comic heroes.
Yes, right? And there are books out there. I actually have a copy. It's a really fascinating book I've read about the science of Star Trek, and like, what do they beam people up, or how accurate, or what is the science behind that, or what is the theory behind that? For one thing, my students, they'd like to point out, well, that's wrong, or that can't be right. And so when you show them a movie, even if it's not even, back when I first started teaching, I would show them clips from action movies. Like, could they really, jump that bus over that bridge and make it across? How fast do they really have to be going? We actually do the physics of it and calculate, if this were the angle and things like that. And so
Mythbusters.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so
Factbusters.
And kids, especially teenagers, they love to point out, well, that's wrong. And so
right, that's another teaching method. Yes.
Which actually there's some aspect of science like that too. We talk about, we can't prove things in science, we can disprove them because that's wrong. So I think there's that aspect too. I do. I didn't grow up like being the nature lover. I probably spent more time playing Nintendo than I did walking around outside. I played outside a lot, and we grew up out in the country, and so we'd run around the trees with our neighbors and play Army and things like that. But I think what amazes me about science, kind of growing up in the space shuttle age in the 80s, just like, wow, isn't this neat? There's that aspect of kind of science fiction, but then also, isn't this neat? And as the older I got in chemistry, and having a good teacher that would help me see those connections, and wow, isn't this amazing? I guess from a faith perspective, it's like, wow, it's amazing how God made this universe. We don't even understand how it all works. We think this might be the way it works, but we can always be, surprised. And so I think some things we don't have to know all the reasons or the ins and outs, but it's neat, the process of learning, which as a science teacher, then maybe we can use those skills of learning and investigating in whatever we do, where it's balancing your budget or trying to, choose a home or choose a school and things like that. So I think having that, again, like that empirical, evidence-based, knowing, well, that's how science works. Life doesn't always work that way. It's not always evidence-based. There's, it's natural mechanisms. I actually teach another class called Science and Society and Technology, and we talk about, we're science teachers, but knowing that science is one way of knowing. There are other ways of knowing out there. There's art, there's religion, there's faith, there's beauty, and so bringing that aspect in, knowing that, okay, my job is to teach science. It's also to connect with kids and inspire them and help them, grow and become better citizens when they grow up as well. But just those connections. And so, going back to science, like Wolverine, like adamantium. Okay, adamantium, not a real metal, but that's what his claws are made of. His skeleton is laced with it or whatever. Well, how hard would it be on the the scale of like, well, is it harder than a diamond? Or, you could kind of bring in those connections like, okay, well, there's no adamantium in the real world, but hey, guess what? We have pumice. We've got all these different rocks. We've got these different minerals, and that's kind of neat. So you can kind of make that connection there, like the what if, so to speak.
Okay, Dan, Professor Bergman, we're coming up on the end of the program. We're running out of time, so I just want to give you the opportunity to speak directly to the hearts and minds of everybody listening, and maybe where they can get your book.
Oh, yeah. So danieljbergman.com is my website. I have a blog connected to that. I've got the book connected to it. You can find the book at locally. I know that Faith and Life has it. I think Anderson's had it on stock for a while, but you can also find it online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, all those things. And if you find me around town, you can find me and say, hey, will you sign this? And I'll be happy to sign it. Anyway, but yeah, I've got other resources on there too. It's not just about the book. It's about, connecting with people who enjoy superheroes, enjoy teaching, that might like one aspect and maybe want to connect to the other. Again, like teaching, you're trying to go from what they know and go into some new things as well. But so I guess my word of advice, I tell my students as well, that we're always learning. I think God has given each of us different passions, different purposes. And so it's neat how there's not necessarily maybe one thing that you're made for. There's many things we're made for, and we can, make it as a way to connect with others and to support and to help others through kindness too.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I appreciate you, Professor Bergman. Thanks for coming on the program. So I just want to tell everybody, thanks for listening to this episode of HCTalk. As always, I was your host, Lance Gormley, and our guest on the program was Danny Bergman, professor and science education chair at Wichita State University, who's the author of Teaching is for Superheroes. Have a good one, everybody.